So welcome. I hope you're having a great conference so far. I thought the keynote was fantastic this morning. I hope you enjoyed it. Out of curiosity, how many of you are here for the first time to one of our online conferences? Has anybody been here more than 2 times? A third time or more, okay? Well, either way, welcome. That's exciting to see some familiar faces. Many of you I have not met. Now, most of you probably have no idea who I am, but you know many on our team. On my team that if you've been hired, I suspect you wouldn't be at this conference if you aren't hired. If you've been hired, if you receive contracts each semester, if you get a paycheck every couple of weeks, that's online operations. So we're going to go ahead. We've actually been asked by others to do this presentation. There's a number of questions sometimes we get with regard to how do we decide who gets a contract, who gets second contracts, that type of thing. And we want to kind of remove the cloak of mystery and explain that a little bit today. So to start with, so what do we do in online operations? This is not the type of operations that we are, although it did make me chuckle when I found this one. The name doesn't intuitively explain what we do in our department. There are 2 departments that report up to Alan Young, our managing director. One department you work closely with, and that's online instruction. So that's the TGLs, the AIMS, on up to Heather Carter and Kimball Benson and the Joelle Galbraith. We're a sister department that works closely with them. What do? We do a lot of hiring. Raise your hand if you have been hired by either Heather Hall or Jen Parkinson. So it's many of you. I will introduce the team momentarily. Just name a few reasons. This is kind of a fun thing. Name a few reasons why corporations, industries, departments have to hire en masse, have to do a high level of hiring at any given time. So just from your experience, what are a couple reasons why you have to hire? Yeah. Okay, so there's growth, right? And that's an exciting thing. We're growing. We need to go ahead and do a lot of hiring. What's another reason other than growth? There's a less happy reason sometimes. Yeah.
Good percentage don't stay.
Yeah, so you hear about this. Maybe you've worked at places where there's just a high level of attrition. We've had to hire a ton of individuals over the last while. The good news is it's predominantly because of growth. We don't lose a lot, and we're excited about that. It's a credit to our students. It's a credit to our teaching group leaders, to each of you, that for the most part, our hiring is because we just continue to grow semester after semester. Just for a little bit of context, I started here before I was ever an administrator. In 2009, I started as an online instructor. Any guess in 2009 how many instructors we had then? I don't have the exact data, but if memory serves, I think I'm pretty close. Any guess? Say it loud.
10.
Yeah, it was about 20 or so if memory serves. Any guess how many we have now? More than 20 is the correct answer. So actually double checked, about 1,050 right now, give or take. So that's 2009, it's not that long ago. So it's been a lot of fun. So that's a little bit of what we do. Now we also periodically do the firing, not often. It will not generally come via email, but if you do get a call from me, it's not always good news. I'm the one, unfortunately, that has the short straw. I am the one that calls for a probation or for a termination. I'm not sure how that worked out. My team gets to hire and send you money. I get to do the firing. But so we do kind of play an HR role, if you will, with regard to online learning. Okay, so but what else do we do? I want to quickly introduce the team. The format for today will be, I'll talk for the first little while, try to answer some of the questions, explain somewhat of what we do within online operations, specifically the questions you may have with regard to timing of contracts, maybe recruiting, you've had friends apply, or how can I go ahead and have friends apply, that type of thing. But you may have other specific questions as well, and so we'll intentionally reserve the last while for a Q&A. That any specific questions that you have, I can try to answer, or better yet, I'll have others in my team answer those questions. But to begin with, and we'll have these individuals stand, we have Heather Hall and Jen Parkinson. They are our hiring coordinators. Now Heather's been hiring for about 4 years now, and Jen is about the last year or so. So most of you, I suspect, have been hired by one of these two. There was also Brittany Loveland, who was doing recruiting and hiring for a stretch as well. So that's another name that may be familiar. We also have Amanda Kingsford and Jessica Maston, and they also do a lot with the hiring, with the paperwork, the photos, just really a lot of the inboarding, and help a lot with the hiring process. We have Pat Surrey. And now you like getting emails from these two generally because often they are contracts for the next semester, and also they do our payroll. They oversee the payroll.
Yay, Pat.
Yay, Anna. Good. I don't know who that came from, but thank you both. We also have Teresa Mosier. Teresa. Now if you're teaching a course that doesn't have embedded text, or you're switching over and teaching a new course, you work closely with Teresa and she gets to the text. She works with the various publishers, textbook publishers, to get to the textbooks. Nathan Routson. Previously, he was over scheduling. He still oversees scheduling and works closely with Pat and Anna, but he does our forecasting and oversees our recruiting efforts and does a good job with those as well. And then Lori Wood. And Lori works closely with Nathan on the recruiting efforts. So many of those names will be familiar, but that's a little bit about our team. Now I wanted to dive in, kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit. We really don't try to be secretive in any regard, but we do get a lot of questions as far as, again, why do some people get 2 contracts? I'd love to have 2, but I get 1 most of the time. You heard President Gilbert talking earlier today that is our model. Our model is that plan on 1, sometimes you'll be able to get 2, but is it a dartboard? You know, what goes into determining? Why do I sometimes get my contract earlier or later than others in my teaching group? I'll explain that a little bit. And you've heard of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, sometimes references ACA. Does that have an impact on how much I'm able to teach? So a couple things that we'll touch on. Okay, so we do attempt to communicate what we do. We really aren't trying to be secretive, etc., but we can do a better job. I was excited when we were approached about presenting here, in that our attempt is that you have a better idea of what we're trying to do. We have attended TGL meetings in the past, so the meetings for the TGLs that they then disseminate to others in their group. We've posted in the community, we've sent emails, but we're mostly to blame why we still get a lot of questions, and that's that we keep hiring a bunch of folks, right? And so we can feel like we've disseminated information fairly clearly, fairly consistently, but then we've hired 500 new instructors. And so we need to do a better job to continuously explain what we're doing. Okay, so our first goal here with online learning, and very consistent with what we're doing in BYU-Idaho, is to serve the student first and to adapt to student demand. So President Gilbert noted that BYU-Idaho is uniquely student-centered. Why is this statement so unique in higher education? To be working for an organization, a school that is uniquely student-centered. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
I think most universities are concerned about funding and publishing and higher, even beyond a bachelor's degree, higher degrees. Good.
So raise your hand if you've ever taught for or attended another institution that wasn't a CES institution. I have, and I have good things to say about those institutions, but generally you'll find a couple things. Not always, but generally you find these other institutions are research-centered as opposed to teaching-centered, and they are faculty-centric as opposed to student-centric. And that really makes a big difference. So here, even as we decide on contracts, as we make our hiring decisions, it's still governed under the umbrella that we are a student-centric university. That is our aim, that is our focus. And I think that's significant. So we have, this is going to be probably a lot of white noise as you look at this, but we do have a forecast, a fairly complex forecast that we put together every semester. Nathan overheads those efforts. And we utilize historical demand, a bunch of other variables, the growth of various programs, the growth of the university, to do our level best in predicting how many courses of English 106 we're going to need in winter semester 2016, or name that course, right? And so we do our best there, and the model's actually worked well enough that other parts of campus have come to us, have come to Nathan to try to utilize that model for other forecasting. And so it works pretty well. But forecasting at its best is still a best guess. And we see a lot of changes from any given forecast. And so we start out every semester, early on in the semester, with what we call our master schedule. And so we'll put a forecast together, we'll have a master schedule that will predict how many sections we'll need for each course, and then how many existing instructors do we have, what's the availability. As you fill out contracts, you have a chance to say, I'm available to teach one course, I'm available to teach multiple courses, etc. And so we take all of those variables into consideration. So that forecast, as I mentioned, it will start to show some openings that we will have. So as President Gilbert talked about today, we have a bunch of new sites that will be opening up in fall, pathway sites in fall, opening up in winter again. And with that growth, that will ultimately lead towards a number of matriculated pathway students. But certainly we don't only serve pathway students, right? You have campus that we're serving, we have online degree students, etc. And so you've seen this more than likely as you applied to teach for us. So we'll go ahead and we try to intentionally keep the postings open solely when we have a projected need in that area. Now our model, if you could imagine, there are times right now where we'll need to hire 200 or 300 adjuncts. And remember, attrition is low, but 200 or 300 adjuncts in preparation for the next semester. And that's a large order. And we want to find great individuals. Now, I'm not just saying this because you're here, but I think we have found some fantastic individuals thus far. But because we're student-centric, we want to make sure that we keep finding those that care a great deal about the students, that want to not only teach the content, but have this be the disciple preparation center that Elder Bednar envisioned. And so with that, we go through a pretty rigorous process in the hiring. You're aware of that. But we also try to hire in advance. We try to make sure that it's not, July, August, and we still have 300 positions to fill, but that we try to find people in advance. I do owe President Gilbert a chocolate bar today. That was a fantastic plug. I didn't know that he was going to make a plug for recruiting, but I do want to just take a moment. Oftentimes, it's those who are teaching the courses. You have, wherever you went to school for your master's, for your doctorate, your undergraduate, you know others that taught communications, that taught English, that taught in home and family, etc. So we'd love to have you continue to share the word. Presumably you're happy. I hope you are. That's certainly our aim. But if you're enjoying the experience, we'd love to have you share with others as well. Now, one thing, and this isn't different than when I had an HR role at a non-higher education institution. Sometimes we get questions saying, why are you still advertising for this position? My sister applied, and you're still showing a need there. There are different filters, and probably some wonderful people that get filtered out. Some of you may have applied a couple times before you were hired. Department chairs ultimately oversee the hiring process, and they're looking for specific things. We then have our interviews and our HR evaluation, or our evaluation course as well. And so sometimes it's a numbers game. Sometimes you may refer somebody who you think would do a fantastic job, but for whatever reason, they're filtered out somewhere along the way. But we still are always looking for good applicants. Okay, so here's a little bit. So we have a master schedule. We have a master schedule, as I mentioned, that starts early. But when do you think we start to see deviations from the schedule? In other words, we have our best anticipation of what's going to happen, and then all of a sudden a certain event takes place and all bets are off. What is that certain event? Any guess? Say it loud. Yeah, student registration, right? So we have this is what we think. This is how students have behaved in the past historically. We're going to project out. And so then all of a sudden we get into registration and we recognize we have fewer students, we have more students, etc., and we have to adapt. And there are many, many changes. Notwithstanding the forecasting being pretty accurate, there are a number of changes that take place from the master schedule to the point of actual registration. We'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but that's one of the reasons why many of you don't get a contract, or during the semesters that you might get a second contract, that you don't get those until registration. In the past, we had a different model early on in our infancy when we were figuring things out, where we would go ahead and we would contract everybody who we thought would be teaching early in the semester. The downside to that was that we were canceling a bunch of contracts. And that doesn't make us feel good. That doesn't make instructors feel good. And so what we try to do now is we're really conservative in how many contracts we send out initially. And then once we start seeing the students vote with their feet, once we start seeing them register for courses, then we're able to go ahead and start giving more contracts. I'm guessing, like me when I used to teach, that you'd probably love to get the contract as far in advance as possible. For budgeting reasons, that was helpful for me as I was a poor graduate student, but the reality is there were a lot of contracts that were being canceled with that model. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit. Okay, so I want to talk about what I like to call a scheduling continuum. This will explain a little bit of what we do and how we do it with regard to, again, the number of contracts, the timing of contracts. So on one end of the spectrum, so on your right, if you look at that, so all instructors teach only one section, what would be advantages? There's certainly disadvantages, but what would be some advantages to having a model that was on that far end of the spectrum? Any thoughts? Yeah.
They might have more time to devote to the students and to give more one-on-one attention.
Good. So how many, and this is a rhetorical question, right? How many of us at any point in life have signed up for more than we probably ought to have? And I'm not talking solely teaching for BYU-Idaho, but sometimes our eyes get big, right? And then we think we can do more than we can. So that's a good thought. Any other thoughts? Any other benefits? Yeah, Dan.
More teachers, opportunities for other teachers.
Good, good. So more teachers as well. One last thought.
I think less burnout. I think sometimes you have to think too much.
Okay. All good answers. There's one other operational advantage as well. If you're on that far right end of the spectrum, and all of a sudden, again, notwithstanding our best efforts, we were off on our forecast, and there's an extra 500 students that want to take this course, we have maximum flexibility, right? If your availability is to teach 2 courses, and everybody's initially teaching 1, you can see where there's added availability. Now, that's not what we do, but those are some of the advantages. What are some of the disadvantages from going down that model? And there are some. What are some disadvantages to everybody teaching 1? Yeah.
So you must have all the people might want more hours.
Sure.
So they'll call elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. So from a morale standpoint, why do you keep hiring new people? I'd love to teach 2 sections, right? Additionally, what if instead of wow, my voice changed like 20 years ago. So instead of underestimating student hours, we overestimate, right? So for the courses, all of a sudden, oh shoot, we just hired 20 instructors, or we contracted 20 instructors, and there's only a need for 15. Then we're back in the business of canceling contracts, and we really don't want to do that. So now shift to your left, the other end of the spectrum. So now every single instructor who wants to teach 2 courses, which is kind of our cap, right? Every instructor who wants to teach 2 is able to. Again, there's some pros to that. What would be, let's take 1 or 2 comments there. What would be some of the benefits to everybody teaching up to your desired level?
More consistency in the way the courses instructed.
Good, good. So more consistency, I like that. What else? Yeah.
Learning curve is gone.
Sure. Yeah, learning curve. And then what does it do to morale? It's a good thing, right? If everybody's teaching the exact amount of courses that you'd like to teach, that's good. And so there are certainly some benefits there as well. Downside, again, comes to our flexibility. If all of a sudden every single person is teaching 2 sections, we have absolutely no ability to adapt. Does that make sense? And that's one of the things. Again, remember, our goal number 1 is adapt to student demand. Now, goal number 2, and we'll talk about this in a minute, is instructor morale. I hope you feel that. We try to help you feel that you're loved, that you're appreciated. I don't know that anybody can leave President Gilbert's presentation and not feel that way. And Elder Clark before him would say so many of the same things, right? But if everybody is teaching 2, and then all of a sudden we could have literally hundreds or thousands of students in different classes not be able to take the courses that they need. Okay, so what is the solution? We'll spend a little bit more time on the explanation end, and then, like I say, we'll intentionally leave you some time to go ahead and ask some questions that you may have. So the solution that has actually worked pretty well. It doesn't make everybody happy every semester, but considering goal number 1 of serving students while still being mindful of instructor morale, I think it's worked pretty well. The idea is that we go ahead, of course, we always ask for what your availability is, and then we have somewhere in the middle of that continuum. So just going back here again, if you can imagine a little red dot somewhere in the middle, that's what we aim for, with the notion being that we go ahead and intentionally give multiple contracts to a certain number of instructors while still having a certain number of instructors who would love to teach to available, if you will, so that if we get into student demands, that we can go ahead and expand. Now, it's not haphazard how we do that. Now, sometimes you might think, well, darn it, I'm the one who would love to teach 2 sections, but I often am only given 1, and that can be frustrating. Like I say, it's not a dartboard approach. The only fair way that we know how to do this is by instructor performance. And so we do, none of these metrics are perfect by any means, but we do look at student evaluations. We do look at teaching group leader evaluations. One other thing to point out, though, is that you could be doing just a fantastic job, and I suspect so many of you are, but there's an element of luck as well, in that in some cases, our forecasting may be off, and so the top-rated instructor in that course still may only get 1 section. Does that make sense? And so that's the governing model that we use. But the beauty of this, and the reason it's worked out really well over the last 3 or 4 years, is that we get into registration and we've overestimated. Then somebody who was initially slated for 2 contracts would lose a 2nd contract, which still could hurt a little bit, but isn't nearly as painful as somebody losing their only contract. On the flip side of things, if we've underestimated student demand and we get into registration, then not only are those initial wave of instructors able to keep their 2nd contract, but we're able to keep others happy too by offering them 2nd contracts as well. So in a perfect world, we really are a bunch of nice people. I don't love making those termination calls, right? We'd love to give everybody as many contracts as you could take as you'd like. But this is hopefully can kind of paint the picture a little bit to the functional reality that we have to deal with. A lot of moving parts with so many students, as President demonstrated this morning, and yet trying to keep instructors happy and students able to get the courses that they need. Okay, so we do care, like I mentioned, quite a bit about instructor morale. So what I wanted to spend a couple minutes, though, is talking about things that you can do that would increase the likelihood at least. Now, again, I'm speaking to you as if every one of you wanted to teach 2 sections every semester, and I know that's not the case. We've seen the data. For many of you, yeah, I like teaching 1, but I'm just too busy otherwise to teach more than 1 section, and that's great. We love having you on board as well, and teach 1 as long as you're able. We love having you do that. But most of these comments will tie into those who would actually prefer teaching multiple sections, and it's giving some tips that could increase the likelihood. Okay, I guess really quickly first, there are a couple of constraints, the ones I just mentioned. Affordable Care Act is not as constraining as we initially thought, and that's because we have what we call CES, or the Church Education System regulations or restrictions, and that's for every adjunct to every CES institution, and that's that they cap us out at 21 credits per year for an adjunct. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I'm well short of that, but for some, it does start to come into play, especially for those of you that get a leadership contract or a development contract, something like that through the year, and you may be doubled up on sections. You may run into that 21 credit umbrella. And again, no different for the adjuncts that teach on campus. So that actually is a little bit more stringent in many ways than our Affordable Care Act constraints. Now, for those of you that are seminary and institute instructors for your day job and also teach for us, we love you. You do a fantastic job, and we have a great relationship with seminary and institutes. But being mindful of the day job, they've asked us to cap everybody at no more than 5.5 credits per semester. So that becomes just a little bit tighter. We can work within those regulations, and we're happy to do so. But if you teach for seminary and institute, you'll notice that you have a little bit of a lower ceiling with regard to how many sections you're able to teach, or how many credits, I should say. Okay, so now what can you do to increase the likelihood of a 2nd contract? Obviously, updating future availability. Now, I mention this because sometimes we get calls in our office, I'd love to teach 2 sections, and yet we find that the person didn't update their availability during the last contract. And so as we're making that master schedule I referenced, we're unable to plan on you for that semester. So I think most do a good job with that, but just be aware. I was asked by my team to make a plug to be as accurate as you can. Now, between the time that you actually note how many hours you're able to work and the time of actually getting the contract, you might be called to be the stake relief study president in that time. You might have triplets, right? You might be the new bishop. We understand life can change, but so far as possible, give us the best estimate you can. That helps us a great deal. Meet the instructor standards. Again, I suspect that's the goal of most. I don't think people come to an instructor conference if you're not trying to be the best instructors you can. But as I mentioned, our selection for those who get multiple contracts, it's not a dartboard, it's not haphazard. We really are trying to utilize the best data we have available to us, going back to goal number one, so that students have the best possible experience they can. So if you feel like you've been doing a decent job teaching, but there's things that your teaching group leaders have recommended, or you learned some things in this conference you can apply, not only will your students benefit, but that can increase the likelihood of being available, of being selected for second contracts. And one other way, and this isn't a guarantee by any means, but if you're cross-qualified to teach other courses, that can also, and I'll explain specifically how, that can in some cases increase the likelihood of, excuse me, of teaching 2 sections in any given semester. Again, it's not a guarantee, but the way we do it, we have, and you may be aware of this verbiage, you may not, but every instructor has a primary course designation. That's the course that generally you will be contracted to teach. And for some individuals, they also have what's called a secondary course, meaning that, for instance, when I teach online, I have a family background, so I'll teach marriage classes or parenting classes, etc. And so I may have the marriage class as my primary designation, but I'll be noted as a parenting teacher as a secondary designation. If there's massive growth in any given semester for that parenting course, even though that's not my primary designation, I could be somebody who could fill in if we're running out of instructors. Does that make sense? They're going to prioritize everybody who's a primary parenting course instructor first, and even second sections for that primary designation first. But we've had it happen frequently every semester where we're grateful that we have those that are cross-qualified. It gives us the opportunity to go ahead and meet student demand and give second contracts to those who are interested. Does that make sense? So again, if you're teaching just the one section, or the one course semester after semester, you love it, nothing ever has to change. One other thing too here, comments were made earlier about burnout, etc. Sometimes individuals get a renewal of energy by switching courses. So if that is something where at some point down the road, you are cross-qualified to teach other courses, again, it's contingent upon instructor demand. It's not always a guarantee, but let us know. We like to accommodate where we can if you'd like to switch from one course to another. Again, it entails a lot of things, including department chair approval, but if you don't ask, then we won't know and we can't accommodate, if that makes sense. We had a question, yeah?
I just wondered, for those that are qualified to teach more than one course, who do we contact if we say, you know what, I'd really like to teach my secondary course that semester off in the future? Who do we relay that communication to? Yeah,
so it's a great question. So 2 different things. Number 1, you would actually apply to teach that course just like you applied in the past. Right. Now, if you remember your login information, or you can, then you don't have to fill everything out again, so it can be a pretty quick process. And it's actually in your advantage to do that because you answered specific questions geared towards the initial posting that may not make as much sense for the new course. Additionally, you may now have 2 more years of online teaching experience, which just makes you look like a stronger candidate the next time the department chair is reviewing your application. So that's one way to do it. That's one thing I was going to answer. The second thing, I forget, so it may come back to me. We're getting a lot of, yeah, go ahead.
Please make a clarification that if you're already at a primary secondary.
Oh yes, thank you, Joelle. So that's the other part. Then just shoot us an email. You can just email us. What's probably the best email? Yeah, so just the letter O, the letter L, then scheduling at BYU-Idaho.edu, BYU-I.edu.
A lot of that will also depend on if there's an opening in that secondary course.
Of course, it's student centered.
That's right. It's a great question. Yeah. I'm going to ask, not because I don't want to hear, I'm going to ask to hold the other ones only because we're going to grab a microphone so that it's better for our online audience when we get to questions in just a minute. So hold those questions. I want to hear if it's about this topic or other ones, and we'll get the microphones out here in just a minute. Again, I touched already a little bit, but this is a question we'll get frequently. Why are some contracts distributed earlier and later? Please know, if you're getting teaching contracts from us, we think you're doing a good job. We have, and I'm very much of this mindset, that we're doing nobody a service to run instructors out who are not willing to abide by our standards. Online instruction, they view it the same way. And so if you're getting contracts, regardless if it's a week before the semester begins or 2 months before the semester begins, we think you're doing a good job. Now, if not, that's when we get into the probation process, etc. But again, it's supply and demand. It really gets into registration numbers. We talked about that already. In fact, I don't know that we need to spend more time on that slide. One question specific, this won't be specific to all of you, but specific to those who teach GS 120. In fact, raise your hand if you've ever taught GS 120, just to know how much time I should spend on it. Okay, so this is a good slide to spend some time on. We have, and again, this is busy, don't try to memorize this, you'll get a headache, but the idea here is that our goal, our just blanket goal with instructors is we would love to have every interested and performing, right, meeting standards instructor teach at least one section every semester. That's our governing goal, but we have a few cases where that's just not a reality. And the main case in which this isn't a reality is in our GS 120 courses. And the reason here, if you look at, so blue line is GS 120, you see them all spike up and down a bit, but specifically notice when the GS 120 sections are at their highest. It's the fall semester. And intentionally, what's the best way to put it? The decision-making ability for when to start these new pathway cohorts. For those that don't know, GS 120 or Life Skills is the first course for our pathway instructors. Those decisions are made at the ground level by priesthood leadership in each area. If it were just up to us selfishly in online operations, that graph would just be a flat line, right? Because it makes it a lot easier for us, it makes it a lot easier for you. We could spread it out, we could be teaching 1 or 2 sections every semester, but that's not our call, and probably rightfully so, because those folks who know the needs, and if you're not super familiar with the Pathway program, it's a great opportunity academically, but it's an amazing thing spiritually as a rescue effort for so many as well, that we really defer to those priesthood leaders to know when to start cohorts. So the downside to that is that if you teach life skills, you teach GS 120, you'll probably teach virtually every fall semester, sometimes 2 sections. Some of you may teach winter semester, but many of you may not teach again until the next fall. Again, please know that's not by design, but hopefully when you see the constraints that we're dealing with as far as the number of sections, it makes a little more sense. It's not that we're all of a sudden hiring a bunch of additional folks to take your place. It's just supply and demand. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so we're gonna have some questions. In fact, I might ask a couple of other administrators if you'd be kind enough to run some microphones around, and then I will either try to answer the question myself, or better yet, defer to my knowledgeable team. So including the hands that were up earlier. In fact, just like President Gilbert mentioned earlier, we'll race the microphones around as quickly as we can, but just for the sake of the online audience, if you will ask the question as soon as you have a microphone, that'd be great. And we'll go for about 12 more minutes. I realize lunch is next. I don't want to have, we'll be tarred and feathered if we get you late too much. So. You had a couple hands. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk about, is it on?
This one's on. Check it out.
Use your, no, don't use your booming voice.
There we go. Thanks, John.
Can you talk about hidden contracts?
Yeah.
And then also as far as applying for other types of courses to teach, how specifically do you go about doing that? Good,
great question. So some of you have had what we call our hidden contracts. And again, that's not intended to be anything sneaky, but there's just an operational advantage to it. It's a great question. So the idea is here, so remember when I mentioned, we'll get back to the slide. Maybe I won't skip back to the slide. I think I missed it. So it was the continuum where you had, there we go. So in that continuum, we try to be intentionally in the middle, meaning again that some of our instructors will have 2 sections, some will have 1. And this is something I omitted, I should have mentioned earlier. We prioritize 1 contract for everybody before even the top instructor would get 2. And to us, that's just a fair way to do it. If we've hired you, you've gone through the training, you've already taught for us, you're excited to teach for us. Even if your score is a little bit lower, we think you deserve the chance to teach before somebody else gets a second. And so what we try to do is we want to make sure that from the master schedule standpoint, we do have enough individuals in place to meet that demand, but we don't start sending out, in many cases, those second contracts until we get into registration. And that's where we would have this kind of operations talk, but we would have a hidden contract. In many cases, we will reach out to you to make sure, we want to double check you would be available for the second contract should registration demand do what we think it will. But again, we don't actually send that contract out until we have the numbers to verify it. And so that's what we mean by a hidden contract. It's a great question. So again, it's nothing punitive. It's nothing to do with your performance. It's all about supply and demand there. It's a great question. And the second part was specifically, how do we go about applying for the second courses? So it's as simple as going on to our HR website, or it's a BYU-Idaho.edu/online, and that's kind of our portal to get you to applying. You would just go ahead. We don't have every course open all the time. We have the courses open where we are either forecasting a demand or a need for the next semester, or even 2 or 3 semesters down the road. Excuse me, but you may see courses, or you may not see courses that you're qualified for and would love to teach every time you look. And so, not unlike applying the first time, you just want to check periodically and see if and when the courses that you're qualified for may open up. So good questions. Yes, in the back.
I just had a question kind of in that same vein. I have applied to other things that I am qualified to teach, and I received an email that said, oh, don't worry about applying that, we'll put you in the pool. And then I never heard back, so I don't know if that was just a kind way of saying we're going in a different direction, no thanks, or what we need to do, because sometimes we apply to that, and then I hear back from OCR or whatever saying, oh, you don't need to worry about applying to that, we've got you on our list, and then I just never hear anything again. So I was wondering what the process is.
Yeah. Great question. In fact, I may have, Heather, do you want to explain that in more detail? I will mention one thing as she's coming up. If you don't hear back from us, and we're actually trying to do a better job of helping everyone hear back when they are technically on a pool waiting, but you will hear back if and when you're not selected for a certain course. That said, we don't want it to only be no news is good news. We want to be anywhere. We've actually hired somebody to specifically be having those those communications. But Heather can give probably a better answer than I can on that.
At least I'll try. If you have talked to an OCR or someone else and they've told you that, other than either Jen Parkinson or me, and they've told you we would put you on a list, then you're not on a list. You need to actually apply for the position. If you've applied for the position and you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to us. A few years ago when I started, we were trying to pull people's applications and send them to the department and try and get people cross-qualified without having you apply. But as you can imagine, with over 1,000 people, that gets really difficult to do that. And also, as Rob mentioned, if you don't answer those supplemental questions within each posting, then your chances of being selected over an external candidate who's targeted their application specifically for that posting, your chances aren't as good. Your application maybe has changed. You can put on your application, if we were using something that you used when you first applied and you've never taught online, you now have online teaching experience, and the department's going to be able to see that if you update your application. So it's in your best advantage to submit a new application for each position. I will mention also that we're trying to get some programming in so that when you go to your instructor portal, you're able to see the other courses that you're, we call it pre-qualified to teach. Some of them are showing up, some of them don't. But pre-qualified can be misleading sometimes. When you're pre-qualified for a course, that means we have got initial department approval for you to teach that course. But when we have a vacancy, the department has the final say on who gets to take that vacancy. And you could be one of 10 other people that want to move, to teach that other course. They actually have the final say. We don't have the liberty to do that. So being pre-qualified is a good first step, but you can't just decide to change your primary course over to that course. If we know, that's why it's good to email OL scheduling and let us know if you're interested in switching courses. And if we know that you're interested in moving, that's helpful for us, because then we can continue to send your materials over to the department in hopes that they'll pick you for that. But if we don't know that you're interested in moving, then we are assuming that you're enjoying where you're at right now, and we probably won't continue to send you over for vacancies, because then we could call you and say, do you want to move, and you might be happy where you are. So does that answer the question that you have?
Thank you
Okay.
so much. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Heather. A couple things to point out too, and we'll go to a couple other questions. So, and I'll just ask for a raise of hands to see if it's worth really talking about this. Do we have S9? Do we have Seminary Institute instructors in here today? Okay, I won't even spend time talking about that one then. But we do also have others who may already be qualified to teach multiple courses, right? You've taught, I'll use my example again, you've taught marriage one semester and parenting another semester and family relations another semester. But again, at any given time, I will have one certain course that is my primary designation. And if I wanted to teach a different one, then that's where it would be really helpful also to reach out and say, hey, if it's possible, could you consider me for a different course next semester? I taught this one 5 straight times and I'd love to be revitalized and teach a new course. So it's kind of different levels. If you're already qualified to teach those, but you haven't taught it for a while, then emailing with that email is also helpful. Okay, a couple more comments in back, or middle.
Okay, so I've got 2 questions. One can be for general for the group. The second is more personal to me. Perhaps I can ask that later. But they're both related. So the first is, tell me more about, well, can you tell me more about how the hiring works for each state? For example, there could be various circumstances where maybe somebody works and their job is based on contracts, sites, and they move from state to state. What happens if you're in a state where you can work, but for BYU-Idaho, but then you move to somewhere else, and then back into a state where you can work again? I mean, can you tell more about that, maybe that process, how that works, and if you're going to add more states to that list, or is that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So with the projected growth, I'd love to add 70 states. It's a slow roller, not that funny? Okay. We're currently in 17 states right now.
21.
Take 2. We are currently in 21 states. See, we are growing. We are growing. At one point, my answer was correct, just not today. So we are in 21 states. And in fact, I've got on my to-do list to beg and plead and grovel with the right individuals to see if they can do the work to get us into additional states. Perfect world, we'd be in all 50. We've lost good instructors that moved to Maine or other states that we're currently not located. So the short answer is, if you move to another state, it has nothing to do with us not liking you. It's just we do not have permission to keep contracting you. But the moment you move back in, I just encourage you to reach out to us again. So hopefully that's helpful.
Would you have to go through the same process, apply, or is all the data saved for that person, or you just swipe them out?
I think it's kind of a length of time thing, right?
You then have to redo paperwork,
Yeah.
but if you've already taught for us and you're leaving because you left the state, then when you come back, just let us know. We'll work with you. And
for the sake of those online, if you couldn't hear, we would go ahead. If it's been a couple of years, and maybe some additional paperwork, et cetera, but otherwise, if you left on good standing, then you come back in good standing. I think we have time probably for 1 or 2 more.
Sorry, I'm sitting down. I have applied online, but it's been several years since I've applied for several courses. But in the instructor portal, I don't see a way that I can, like, once you've submitted the application for review, there's not a way to edit or to change that I've noticed. So how do we go about updating formally that application to make sure that all of that information is accurate?
Okay, who wants this one? First one up.
Without withdrawing.
You would just need to contact Jen or I to let us know that you can send your updated resume, we can update that. One thing you should know too is that your application will expire after 2 years. So the reason that we do that is so you can start over and update things, because we know things change and we want the most recent information. So, but if it's been recently, it's been within those 2 years, just contact us and we can update your resume, or we can reactivate parts of your application so you can update that.
Your email is
onlinehr@BYU-Idaho.
Good. Okay, one more question and then we'll run to lunch. And I'm happy to stay a little while to answer questions, either via individual or just ones you didn't get a chance to ask, but otherwise we'll let the group out after this last question.
Mine's kind of a follow-up to this brother's question. We got an email not too long ago that says if we even leave and go somewhere for a couple of weeks on vacation, that's against our contract. If we know that's going to happen, my wife is French, we might be going to France for 2 or 3 weeks next year. Does that mean I drop that semester? What's my standing for the fall if that does happen?
Did you get that email from us? That was,
Yes.
okay.
So it says if we're gone for 2 weeks or more somewhere, that we can't be contract. I don't think France has a contract, that we couldn't continue that was against our contract.
Rob,
So
can
is
I touch on that?
Yeah, do it.
Again, I don't know where the email is coming from necessarily, but obviously we're concerned. We've had instructors go on extended cruises where they hoped they might have internet, but didn't in the end, and students just lost their instructor. So, we're this is an online program, and we know we're flexible with instructors. And we know if they've got a Disney or a trip to France, and that some places you're going to be able to check in better than others. But we've had many instructors either tell us or not. You don't even have to tell us, but we've done it ourselves. Go to conferences, do different things. As long as you know you can have internet and stuff and be there for your students, we certainly don't mind. I guess at some point it would be an issue that you are kind of out of state. 2 weeks certainly isn't that.
I've gone before, and that's what I thought. I'm screwed up.
So you're going over and can't get grades in at the end of the semester. It's similar how you treat a student that is saying, hey, I'm going to whatever, you make some accommodations at some point.
And as far as from the HR end, we handle it on a case-to-case basis. If you were to move, for instance, mid-semester to a state that we don't have a business presence, you'll finish out that contract. We just couldn't reschedule you. Probably the biggest takeaway from that last question, you probably already come to this conclusion, just don't go on vacation. You can retire at some points. It's a lot easier. Thank you guys. Enjoy lunch.